first question I want to look at is, what do you think about the King James Version? Now, there is a ton of videos, a ton of content creators, a ton of stuff out there about this whole debate with the King James Version of the Bible and if it's the most accurate, if it's the most trustworthy. I mean, in fact, there's a group of Christians, and they're called the King James Version onlyists, where they only subscribe to the KJV. They think it's the only inspired word of God, that every other translation is filled with errors and contradictions. It's been corrupted, verses have been taken away, verses have been put in, and they just basically demonize every single translation of the Bible except the King James Version. And there's a ton of people that think this way. And I've come across it, and to be honest, my honest opinion is I think it's ridiculous. I'm not going to get into the weeds in terms of manuscripts and really dive too deep into it. There's a ton of information out there already if you want to kind of dive into this more on your own. But I will say this, is that, back in 1611, I think, around there, when the King James Version was first completed, it was using a set of manuscripts. And those were the only ones that the translators at the time had access to. And so they used it. But then fast forward to, I think it was 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And with that, thousands of manuscripts were then found. And so a lot of the modern translations that we have from ESV, NIV, NASB, NLT, CSB, I mean, all of the kind of mainstream translations, they were all translated from newer manuscripts. So manuscripts that were found in 1947, but manuscripts which predate the manuscripts that the King James Version was used. Now, again, it's I don't want to go too deep into this, but so you have the King James Version people who claim that no, their manuscripts were the inspired ones, and that these other ones, despite the fact that they predate them, they're not the inspired ones. And then you have all the translations using these newer transcripts because they're older and they found a lot more copies of them and blah, 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 blah. And so that's the divide. So if you love the King James Version, that's great. Use it. It's probably the most famous, the most common, I guess, translation that maybe is used. I'm not sure of the statistics. But you can't take that and say, well, it's the most inspired. And then, say that every other translation that's out there is wrong or is incorrect or is not as complete or not as inspired or blah, 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 blah. It's a ridiculous argument, because when you study all the manuscripts, when you actually do textual criticism, and a lot of smarter people than me have done that, and you have these translations like, I think, the ESV, for example, which is a translation that I really love, there's like a whole team of like 50 plus, I think, scholars that got together to put that translation together. And so a lot of these translations have been put together and by teams and communities of scholars. It's not just one dude in his basement putting together a translation. Now, let me just do a quick aside here. If you're watching this and you've heard of the Passion Translation, well, that's kind of how that one was put together. One dude saying he got some divine revelation from God, and God gave him all the secret insight into, the Bible, and so he wrote his own Bible, his own translation. Okay, stay away from the Passion Translation. That's all I'm going to say about that for right now, but that's how that one was written. So These other translations, that's not how they were written. Teams of scholars have put them together. Now, there's no translation that's perfect. Every translation has to make certain choices in certain places, but by and large, all those translations, NIV, ESV, NASB, NLT, CSB, they're all solid translations. And so my advice is find a translation that you like and stick with it. If it's a KJV or if it's one of the newer translations, they all got strengths. They're all good, minus the Passion Translation. Don't read that one. But yeah, this, as far as this King James Version only stuff, don't pay attention to that. It's a group of people that are taking things to unhealthy levels, making claims that aren't true. They're passionate about the word, passionate about truth. It's just misguided. So that's my take on the King James Version.